typical business hears from just 4% of its dissatisfied customers. We all know that learning from our mistakes and failures are how we grow and how we achieve long-term success. But if most of our failed customer instances never see the light of day, how do we learn from them? One more statistic for you to consider. 81% of companies with strong client relations outperform the competition. And this may seem obvious, but when we consider what we covered in the first episode, this becomes more helpful. We talked with Dr. Mark Brigman about how true partnerships and relationships are not transactional in nature, which means that just because a client has purchased from us doesn't mean there's a real relationship there. Therefore, when we say that a company is focused on client relations and making an effort to strengthen them, that means something more than just sales or customer service. But how do you build these kinds of relationships? How can you make sure that they grow over time? And what are the best ways to leverage them in order to grow your business? This is Partnership Unpacked, your go-to guide to growing your business through partnerships quickly. I'm your host, Mike Alton, and each episode unpacks the winning strategies and latest trends from influencer marketing to brand partnerships and ideas that you can apply to your own business to grow exponentially. And now, the rest of today's episode. Welcome to Partnership Unpacked, where I selfishly use this time to pick the brains of experts at strategic partnerships, channel programs, affiliates, influencer marketing, and relationship building. Oh, and you get to learn too. I'm Mike Alton, head of strategic partnerships at Agorapulse, and in today's episode, we're digging into client relationships and how brands can successfully nurture partnerships with paying customers, the kind of partnerships that'll result in not only long-term retention, but also incredibly valuable and rewarding feedback. And I've got the perfect guest today to help us break this down. But first, let me give a quick shout out to some terrific folks I see tuning in live. There's Wes Wyatt. Yes, definitely, Wes. I had a dynamite, can't even say that, Labor Day weekend. I hope you did too. And I am here today with the accomplished Rob Walsh. Let me get him on screen here. There's Rob. He is the Vice President of Podcast Relations for Libsyn and was introduced into the Podcasting Hall of Fame in 2016. And prior to joining Libsyn in 2007, he was the president and founder of Podcast 411. Rob is co-author of the book Tricks of the Podcasting Masters, an editor's pick as a top 10 reference book for 2006 by Amazon. Rob's consulted on podcasting for eBay, Jack Welch, Tim Ferriss, Senator Edwards, Governor Bill Richardson, Dr. Mike Hyman, and the Sacramento Kings, just to name a few. He's also on the editorial board and a columnist for the Podcast Business Journal. Please welcome Rob Walsh to Partnership Unpacked. How you doing, Rob?
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. It's so good to have you. And I'd love it if you told the folks a little bit more about your background and specifically what you do at Libsyn.
Well, as you covered quite a bit of my background, but I've been podcasting almost 17 years now. I started back in 2004. And I've launched many podcasts, but at Libsyn, my day job, one of my biggest parts of my day job is working with our pro customers. And that means I get to work with a lot of enterprise customers. And that includes Microsoft, Google, Oracle, Deloitte, PwC, you name it. There's many, many Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that I get to work with. And it's great talking with them, seeing what they're doing with podcasting and how they're using it and not using it to be a sales platform, where they're pitching, but rather a way to connect and educate and stay connected with their potential customers.
Awesome. That's going to fit perfectly into everything we're going to cover today. So let's talk client relations. Rob, what does that really mean to you and how exactly do you work with Libsyn's podcasters?
Well, my title is great because VP of Podcast Relations. That my job is to really just communicate, work with, talk with, help, advise other podcasters. And believe it or not, I'm an old school guy. People ask, what tools do I use? I use email and phone and GoToMeeting, but I like to have calls. I like to send out personal emails, not through email blasts. And I don't use any email tools for mass emails. I do a lot of one-to-one podcast emails out to the Libsyn Pro customers. When I have to do it, maybe sometimes I'll do some copy and paste into a BCC, but most of the time it's one-to-one. And in this day and age, I think that stands out. That helps because there's so many times you've seen where you get an email and it's hi, comma, right? And how far do you read after that comma? Right? If there's no space between the I and the comma, it turns you off. So I've looked at it, the best way to be efficient at my job is sometimes to do things inefficiently.
That's a really good point because you're talking about personalization, and I know a lot of other brands and tools, they'll talk about personalization at scale, but you're not scaling it. You're just continuing to drive forward at that personalization level. I've done a lot of the same thing when it comes to social media engagement. People have often remarked to me that they've been surprised that they'll always get a reply from me. When they post or they tag me or they mention me or they ask a question, I'm always responding because it's something I think is very important. So it's really cool to see you're kind of on that same page, that same wavelength. But I'm wondering for businesses who maybe they haven't considered developing these kinds of relationships with their clients before, how would you recommend that they actually get started?
With the next customer that comes along asking a question. I mean, it's just start doing it and answering those emails. Try to clear out your emails if you can each day. Go through, stay on them. It's a tough thing to do, but the benefit, the payoff for it is huge. When they feel and know they're getting a personal touch, that's what they're paying for. A lot of times, customers, they're not paying for your service because the underwriting part of your service, they probably can find that elsewhere. The reason they picked you over your client or your customer, or your competitor, is that you're doing something that they felt was a little bit different. And if that difference is a human touch in this day and age, that's a big deal. I know I personally respond that way when I have different vendors I work with. The ones that do the personal touch, I'm willing to pay more for, knowing that if something comes up, there's an issue, there's a go-to person that I can get to at the other end.
Yeah, that's another excellent point. And again, to just tie it back to my world of social media, we've seen the same thing when, as a brand, we're replying to a customer online in a tweet or something like that. You have to reply as the brand. We reply, from @Agorapulse or something like that. But we make it a practice to sign off at the end of the tweet with the individual's name, right? Like -Mike, -Deb, whoever is responding to that person. So they know that there is a human, a person on the other end of that tweet, and helps create that personal connection, help build that rapport, like you mentioned. I know you work with over 75,000 podcast producers on obviously the world's largest podcasting network. And I know you kind of said you don't really use a lot of tools, but I'm going to push on that a little bit because there's got to be something that you use to help you manage all those people. How do you know who you're going to reach out to next? Are there any platforms you use?
Yeah, and when we have 75,000, I'm not the only one working on this. We do have, I don't handle the social. So like Elsie Escobar handles our social, and she's out there communicating in social. I'll chime in social. I'm more of a voyeur on our social, and every now and then I'll see something that's really interesting and I'll jump in. But I know Elsie's got it for the most part. And, she'll email me if there's a question that comes up that needs, she'll say, hey, this one needs some more personalized touch. And I'll go out and I'll reach behind the scenes to people. I'll say, I saw that you on Twitter, you had this question, and this is better answered via email or a phone call. Because sometimes, it's hard to answer stuff in 280 characters, right? Sometimes you can't even get started on the answer. You have to that's just your recap of your understanding of what their question was. So I don't like those Twitter strings where it's like 1 of 10, 2 of 10, 3 of 10, 4 of 10, because people only see the 7 of 10 and take it out of context. But, and then our marketing team does, on the Libsyn.com side, does use some more bulk tools to reach out and send out newsletters and people can opt in. But on the Libsyn Pro side, I don't do that. On the Libsyn Pro side, we have less customers, where it's not as many, it's multiple hundreds of customers versus multiple, tens of thousands of customers. So on the Libsyn Pro side, where they're getting a little bit different service, more of a white glove concierge service, we treat them with a white glove and more of a concierge feel. So you have to look, we do have two different offerings out there. So if you are someone that needs phone support, needs your handheld, wants to be walked through, we have the Libsyn Pro for that. And Libsyn.com is more your DIY, do it yourself. If you know what you're doing, email support's fine. But if you need that phone support, we have Libsyn Pro. And if you have lawyers that want to look at our terms of service, we have Libsyn Pro. Yeah. So I joke with customers. I go, if the word lawyer comes up anywhere, you're probably suited for Libsyn Pro.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. Now, if you're just tuning in, we're talking about development of client relationships and strategic partnerships. And I'm talking to Rob Welch, VP of Podcaster Relations for Libsyn. And shifting gears for a moment, I know you've also helped, like you mentioned, the strategic building, strategic and navigating strategic partnerships with other brands like Apple and Microsoft. What were those partnerships like?
They take time. Some of them back in the day involved going out to Redmond and meeting with the team and things like that. So there was in-person visits. Now those are being replaced obviously by Zoom and Skype or GoToMeeting or was it Microsoft Office or Meeting Place. So there's a lot of different tools you can use on the video side to help that connection because we can't get out there anymore to meet with folks. But some of them, it's a lot of you're going to have, when I launch with a big Fortune 500 company and they're moving over their podcast, I may have 4 or 5 calls a week with one of those clients, just going over all the little details. Hey, your artwork's not right. Just every little minutia detail they can think of that you're going to have to answer and educate them and bring them up to speed as they launch into the podcast space. And it's always remembering that what I do for my day job all the time, they are most likely just doing once ever. They're launching a show. Maybe they may launch 2 podcasts ever in their life, whereas I'm going to help 10 people launch in a day or more than that in a week for sure. So always keeping in mind where my customers are, what their level of understanding of your product is, and not assuming they know everything you know. Not being afraid sometimes to dummy it down as basic as I can possibly make it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Trying to always keep your client's worldview in place and realizing that they don't know what they don't know. In fact, you reminded me, Libsyn shared on LinkedIn, it's been a few weeks now, a statistic that they mentioned your name. So I don't know if you ran the report or where it came from, but it was talking about the popularity of podcasts and talking about how podcasts with more than, I think, 100 downloads per episode were in like the upper echelon in terms of popularity, which was kind of a mind-blowing statistic to me. Because I mentioned in the green room, I had launched a podcast of my own. It's been almost a year, and I did like 18 episodes. And I felt like it was a lot of work. And I felt like wasn't really getting a lot of listenership and viewership. So I wasn't really feeling like I was getting much out of it. So I kind of put it on hiatus and worked on some other projects. And now looking back, my last few episodes were getting 130, 150 downloads per episode.
That puts you in the top 50%. 130 is...
And that put me in the top 50%, which I had no idea.
That's one of the biggest things is setting expectations in the podcast world, because I'll deal with people that are working in social media. And here's a perfect example. We have a major golf manufacturer we do the podcast for. They have over 6 million followers on Facebook. And their podcasts don't get the same number of no podcast has 6 million listeners, right? Joe Rogan's the biggest. He was at 2.5, 3 million. But they don't know this. People don't know that. They just hear these crazy numbers. And this golf manufacturer was getting 50,000 views per episode. And they said, hey, what are we doing wrong? We've got 6 million followers on Facebook. We're just getting 50,000 listens. And I said, you're not doing anything wrong. That's in the top 1%. I go well into the top 1%. And 33,000 get you in the top 1%. I go, you are doing great. I mean, phenomenal. And they didn't have this measuring stick. They were so used to social media. And so you have to set that expectation up. We had another person who had 18.9 million subscribers on YouTube, 60 million social media followers on all the different platforms, and 43,000 podcast listeners. And I have to give that as an example to folks and say, hey, keep this in mind. And then I say, for business podcasts, I have to tell them, you're going to be lucky for B2B podcasts to ever get over 1,000. And if you get to 1,000, that's in the top 20%. But think of it like this. If you had 500 people listening per episode, when was the last time you went out and spoke in a conference and you had 500 people in the room, right? 200 people in a room is a big room at most conferences. 500 usually is the keynote room. Right? So if you had 500 show up to a speech, how much money, if I said to you, hey, you can go to the live at this conference and you're going to have 500 people show up, how much would your company be willing to pay for your airfare, your hotels, all this, right? Now think about this. You're doing that every week week after week after week. Now podcasting 500 listeners seems like a really good deal. And when you explain it to them and they understand that, they're like, well, yeah, it's not about big number. It's about the right number. And podcast listeners are the right number wherever they are because they're interested in your content. It's very niche specific medium. And once they get that, the ones that get that, they stay podcasting with 200 and 300 happily, thinking they're doing great. And they are. Right? If you're doing a podcast on fossil fuel, some sort of, we've got like energy and resource from one of the major companies, and they have some strange ones. Oh, what was one? Hydro pump was a podcast about pumps, literally about hydro pumps. How niche can you get? Well, pretty darn niche.
Yeah, that is such good advice for any business, not just obviously those in the podcast world, because again, like I said, I'm coming from that perspective as a podcast once in a while producer and wondering if I'm doing it right, if this is a good use of my time, but the point of this particular interview is to pull out the insight that you just shared with everybody, which is that as a business owner providing a service, it's incumbent on us to help our customers set their own expectations and understand where they're achieving success. And as Joey Porter, a keynote speaker at Social Media Marketing World, once shared, identifying those moments of success and being there to celebrate with them is another key aspect. So I love that you went that way. And I'm wondering, because we were talking about brand partnerships and we've been talking about client relationships, what would you say are kind of the same in terms of dealing with other brands, dealing with clients, and what might be totally different in those two respects?
In a brand partnership, what I found is what that really means is they want you to provide the tools to promote their brand. Right? So yes, it's a partnership as long as their brand remains number one and you stay behind the scenes. And we're fine with that. We're okay. And we design our tools for that. A client relationship, I look at it a little different in that they just want you to help them bring in customers for them and get them out everywhere. They want you to do whatever you can to help promote them and do that. Where the brands, they just want the tools to do it. It's the way I look at the two difference. And we work with some big brands. I mean, we work with John Deere, Trader Joe's, and folks like that. So some of the biggest brands out there, obviously Google and Microsoft. So I think on the brand side, they really just want us to provide the best tools, the advice, but then really to make sure we stay in the background. But clients, I think that the way I look at it, especially when I'm helping I do some clients on the side, they just want to get it out there and they want you to help them do whatever it takes to promote it. And that can be co-promoting and things like that. They're fine with us promoting them on our site, things like that, where the brands are like, no, don't even put us on your site. Don't mention us there. We've got lawyers. You can't do that. I've had one of the big brands say, hey, you need to take down the logo from your list of customers. I'm like, well, the host said he wanted it promoted. Oh, no. The host doesn't have the right to say that, which is what I found. I'm like, okay, fine. We'll take that down. I got 5 other people that want that slot on our website. I'll give it to them. So the brand's very lawyered up too.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned some name brands, but I know you've also worked with some clients, some specific individuals who've established, what I would call mainstream success and notoriety, like a Dave Ramsey. I'm curious how the approach there may have differed in terms of like recruiting them, because I know we've had similar experiences at Agorapulse where we'll talk to a major social media influencer like a guy Kawasaki about coming on the platform, and he's got millions of followers that we've got to navigate. How's that worked for you?
Well, Ramsey's team, that relationship started. I actually met one of the people from their team at a conference many years ago. And the conference was about an hour and a half away from the airport. And I happened to have a rental car and said, hey, do you need a ride to the airport? And gave him a ride and got a good conversation with him and built the relationship from that ride and helping him out getting back to the airport because he was in a tight fit to meet there. But ultimately, it's come just from Dave's team answering their questions, being willing to go down there. I moved to Nashville. It's like, hey, I literally moved 10, 15 minutes from their office, but I would come out here once a year and meet with their team, go over the podcasting space, give them a very personalized meeting, walk in with 5 Daughters Donuts. If anyone's from Nashville, they know what that means. And not just the Krispy Kremes, you go to the best donut place, right? Just the little sales things you do, but meeting their team and then answering their emails. And that means in the middle of the night or the weekend. answering those emails and helping them out and connecting them. And Dave's team requires a more constant touch in handhold, which is great because we look at it, there's only 4 podcasts that have ever gotten to 1 billion downloads, and Dave's was the 4th. And it's Joe Rogan, I think it was The Daily was the 3rd one, and then I forget the 2nd one was Stuff You Should Know, I believe it was. And then 4th one was Dave Ramsey to get to that billion mark. So we're real happy that he was able to do that with us and get to that level. And it's amazing how loyal his listenership is and how important it is that those episodes go out when they're supposed to go out. They're late, something's not working right. If it's not working on a certain platform, we hear about it right away. And if metrics aren't right, I'll tell you, Dave's team, I love numbers. I love stats. I have never met a team that loves numbers and stats as much as I do. So they really look everything over.
That's a terrific story. And I love that you shared it because I heard something very similar from Amy Landino. I don't know if you know Amy, longtime video producer, podcaster. And she shared the story about, kind of before she got started, she was on the cusp, right? Gary Vaynerchuk was flying into Columbus, Ohio and had to be someplace else outside of Columbus. And she did the same thing. She offered to pick him up at the airport and drive him to where he needed to be, so she could have 15 minutes in the car with Gary V. And he gave her great advice and they had a great conversation. But you fast forward to today, she's now part of VaynerMedia. She's, being outsourced by his team for speaking gigs. They've had a long time working relationship that started with that pickup at the airport, just like with you and Dave Ramsey. So it all kind of speaks to having that, like you said at the beginning, white glove approach and that customer minded approach, taking care of people.
Yeah, it wasn't Dave in the car. It was one of his team.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. An hour and a half of Dave in the car, that'd be great. I mean, I've seen Dave live. Let me just tell you what. I have never seen a better speaker on stage than Dave Ramsey. I mean, his presence, how he moves, I wasn't even listening to what he was saying. I was just so captivated how he was saying it. And, if you're a speaker, you understand that. You're looking at someone, you go, wow, how he moves around stage, how he connects with the audience. So some great people out there that I've been able to get connected with over the years. And it's fun. Tim Ferriss, I helped launch his podcast. And that was a lot of fun. I fired myself as his producer. But he's a Long Islander. I grew up on Long Island. But, Tim is a fun guy and a lot of energy, but he didn't want to edit. And I'm like, oh, I can't do this. I got to edit. You hit the mic. He's like, no, leave that in. I'm like, oh. But he's all about the content. And that's right. He's right. Yeah. It's all about the content.
Awesome. Well, that kind of leads into the next question I have, which is to talk about what not to do. Because from a podcast production perspective, you have to edit. You can't not edit because you got to remove some of the bloops and technical stuff that happens and create that seamless audio experience for your listeners. But in your experience, when it comes to client relations and partnerships, what mistakes have you made, or what tactics have you seen brands make that they probably shouldn't or should avoid?
The biggest mistake I made, I started out, I was in podcasting back in 2005. My first client was Senator John Edwards, and it's this early 2005, pre the Apple supporting podcasting. He was the first major politician to do a podcast, and I was the producer doing all the work for that podcast. And then I got contacted right after Apple Podcast launched, or iTunes launched support for podcasting. I got contacted by another senator who wanted to do a podcast. And I said, oh, well, I don't think it'd be right. I think it might be a conflict of interest. Here's somebody else that's in your city that I know that's doing some podcast work. Why don't you talk with them? They can help you get going. A couple weeks later, I'm talking to Senator Edwards' people. I said, oh, yeah, I got contacted by another senator who wanted to do a podcast. And, I said, I thought it would be conflict of interest. And they said, oh, who was it? And I said, oh, it was Senator Obama. And they go, oh, no, you could have done his. And I'm like, oh. So I learned a valuable lesson, which was check before you reject. So I could have had his. Yeah. And then I did wind up getting Governor Bill Richardson. So it was fun in the 2008 presidential debates. There was on stage at one point, there was Governor Richardson, Edwards, Obama, and Hillary Clinton up there. And I was like, I could have had 3 of the 4 up there as clients. But yeah, so that was one thing I definitely learned now, was never assume that you can't take a client on because it might be a conflict. You check and find out for sure. Yeah, I wish I had that one back.
Yeah, I bet.
And the other thing is, like I fired myself for Tim Ferriss because Tim brought me in to help him launch it. But he didn't need to pay me what he was paying me to edit it. And, he didn't need that level that I was going to bring to it. So I walked away in there. But I did keep Jack Welch on. I had Jack Welch as a client, and that was a great one until his passing. And he was fun. And it was being able to have a mic in a room with Jack when he thinks he's off mic and hearing him talk. Boy, you want to talk about someone who could curse like a sailor. Oh my. So there was some good fun recordings there, the stuff I had to edit out. But Jack was a really interesting, really nice guy, and not a better business mind out there before his passing.
I bet. I want to give a quick shout out to Becca, who was listening on LinkedIn, and she said the numbers blow my mind. I had no idea. I know, right? I shared the same thing with my team because we've had a long time podcast at Agorapulse, the social media lab. And it does very, very well. And he does experiments on social media. That's Scott Ayers, and does speaking tours, giving live presentations. And every week he's interviewing and talking about experiments. And it was still the same thing. I mean, we knew it was doing well, but we didn't know how well, at least not in comparison, right? Compared to what? That's always the question. So love that you shared that.
Yeah, people just need to understand that the numbers aren't very high. And you can't look at social media followers or YouTube subscribers and think that has any relevance at all to podcasting. If you can get to 1,000, you're better than 80% of the shows out there. And and really that number, 80%, is really, I should put that in perspective. That's the number of shows, 80% on Libsyn. And Libsyn, all our podcasts pay to host. If you had actually pushed those numbers out to include the free hosting and all the other stuff, if you had 130, you'd probably be in the top 5% or 3% of shows. In reality, if podcasts are out there, because most people don't realize when you hear 2.4 million podcasts, of those 2.4 million, the number that's actually active, as in released something in the last 90 days and has 10 or more episodes, that number is like 220,000, 260,000, I think is the number now. So it's 1/10, basically 10% of the podcasts out there are technically active. 90% are dead or just haven't gotten there, So don't think that you are moving into this space. Don't get afraid of moving into the space because you hear the 2.4 million number of podcasts. There really isn't that many. And when you really bring it down to 260,000 or even 300,000, and maybe at the most 400,000 active podcasts, put that in perspective to the 750 million active blogs out there. And then you really see how podcasting stands out from the other mediums. And there's no better medium to connect with your audience because your audience is going to listen with these a lot of times. And that means you're literally in their head, literally in the middle of the head. It's like being John Malkovich. You get in there and you can really connect and you can talk to your audience, and the power of the voice in your clients' or potential customers' ears is so powerful. It's so strong. I think John Jantz at Duct Tape Marketing had a great podcast philosophy, which was he started the podcast as a way to interview potential clients. And rather than cold call someone and say, hey, I think you should use my marketing tools, being able to go out to someone and say, hey, I think you're brilliant. Why don't you come on my show? Which one gets you a reply, right? Cold call or the stroking the ego? And podcasting really can help you grow your customer base if you do it right.
You're not supposed to share the behind the scenes of why I'm doing this show. For those of you listening, that is exactly why I have Partnership Unpacked, is to give me a channel on which to talk to and meet great potential new partners for down the road. I mean, last week we had SEM Rush. In 2 weeks, we're going to have Monday.com. These are all great potential partners for me, people I want to work with and get to know, just like you, Rob. So, and in fact, we've got John Jantz on our Lunch and Learn webinar series later this month. So for those of you who aren't familiar with John and Duct Tape Marketing, you got to come because he's got a new book coming out later this month. I even have it here. Yeah, The Ultimate Marketing Engine. For those of you watching, this is John's new book. So yeah, great
John's
tip. And Becca asks, fantastic guy. Our CEO Emmerich was on his podcast last month. Becca asks, this is a pure podcasting question for you, Rob. Becca wants to know, I'm new to podcasting and basically not sure where to start. Do you have the top starting tips, sort of a starter pack?
Okay, so 3 things here. One, and I'll give you the history on this. My son was 5.5 years old when he started podcasting, and he came to me and he said, Dad, I want to start podcasting. And I turned to him and I asked him these 2 questions. And these are the first 2 questions you have to answer if you want a podcast. I said, okay, Porter. I go, what do you want to do a podcast about? And he said, I want to answer people's questions. So he knew he had a format. So you have to know what you want to do. So that's the first thing. Second, I said, what do you want to call it? He goes, I want to call it Porter's Podcast. So he had a name so once you get past those two things, those are the real big hurdle. The third one, email me, rob@libsyn.com. I will give you some other, the technical behind the scenes stuff to what you need. But really, if you can't answer those first two, you can't podcast. You have to really be able to define it. And the name is so important. People don't realize how important the name is. In Apple Podcasts and most of these services, search is like Alta Vista. It's really basic. It's what's in the title of your show. And matter of fact, Apple only looks at what's in the title of your show and what's in the author tag. They don't even look at the descriptions, forget tags or keywords. It's only what's in the title of the show. So your title of your show is really, really important. And then finally, get some good looking, artwork. Where is it? There it is. Get some good looking artwork for your show. That's the show that we do, the feed on Libsyn. That's the official Libsyn podcast. Get some artwork and then you get going. But once you get past answering what it's about, really the rest of it is just fill in the blanks, connecting dots. It's not that difficult. You have to have some artwork. It has to be the right specs. You have to be able to record. You have to figure out how you're going to record. Do you want to have a more expensive microphone, or do you want to go with a little bit of a cheaper microphone, or do you not even want to use a microphone and just go with an iPhone? There's all different ways that you can record. Those are things I can help answer. Just email me, rob@libsyn.com. Happy to help you out, Becca.
That's awesome. Yeah. And just to chime in, because you were very gracious, Libsyn's fantastic. Guys, I've been using Libsyn for 3 years now, and we'll be launching third and fourth podcasts later this month. And it's super easy to start. You just say, okay, I've got this much data, this many podcasts to upload. It tells you exactly what dimensions you need for the different artwork, because there's a bunch of different things that you can upload. It's really easy and it's affordable. And speaking of gear, this is an ATR, USB, and XLR mic, and I pipe it through a Behringer mixer. So it's under $200. And I'm no judge, but I've been told I have excellent audio quality. So who knows? I just know it's not expensive to get started. So that's great.
It really is not. There was a television show, I don't know if anyone's seen it yet, on Hulu called Only Murders in the Building. And in one
Steve Martin.
Yes, and Martin Short and Selena Gomez. And in one of the episodes, they were talking about buying the gear, and he said, okay, it's $4,500. And I went, no. So yeah, no, you can get started well under that. As a matter of fact, if you want to go with, this is a Zoom H6, and you get a couple of the ATR 2100s or the Samsung Q2Us, you're going to spend less than $500 to get a really decent setup. Now, you don't have to put foam all on your walls like I did and make a studio or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I've only had this studio completed like this for 1 month, and I've been podcasting for 17 years. Before that, it was just some foam in the corners and in a quiet room and telling the kids, shh, Dad's recording. All right, and that was it. Now I got a little bit better studio, but you don't need any of this. Again, $500 at the most to get started on equipment.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Rob, you have been a terrific guest, and I want to thank you so much for lending us your time and your insight into partnerships and podcasting and everything else. And I can't wait to take all of your amazing suggestions and apply them to our efforts at Agorapulse. Now, for everyone else that's listening, what's the best way to reach out to you if you have questions? Is it your email, or what would you prefer?
Yeah, absolutely. Email rob@libsyn, R-O-B as in Robert, rob@libsyn.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me. As my wife will tell you, I'm constantly checking my email.
Yeah, I get that too. Well, that's all we have for today, folks. Don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn if we aren't already connected. If you're watching the replay or listening to the podcast, don't hesitate to comment or reach out if you've got any questions at all. Until next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of Partnership Unpacked, hosted by Mike Alton and powered by Agorapulse, the #1 rated social media management solution, which you can learn more about at agorapulse.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. Be sure to leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us. And if you want to be part of our audience during live broadcasts, take a look at our calendar at agorapulse.com/calendar. Until next time.